Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Former St. Tammany Sheriff Jack Strain has witnessed many election nights in his home parish. Next Saturday, he will be getting the results in a neighboring Plaquemines parish jail while awaiting permanent sentencing. This week, a guilty plea was added to previous convictions. Also, sometimes it's the low turnout elections that have the highest impact. That might be the situation when St. Tammany's voters decide on a casino proposal. In New Orleans, some council runoffs are on the ballot, as well as a tense showdown for criminal sheriff. In sports, we will examine how LSU is able to pay big money for coaches both coming and going, and the Saints weigh the numbers for possibly getting in the playoffs. Those stories, plus the Municipal Auditorium in danger of losing federal funding, are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Jeff Duncan, sports reporter for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and also analyst for WVUE Fox 8 Sports. And Sarah Pagones, North Shore reporter for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we stay with Sarah. First, let's talk about that casino vote that's coming up next weekend.
A week from tomorrow, for the first time since 1996, St. Tammany voters will go to the polls to make a decision on gambling. It's been a really, really heated lead up. Millions spent. The latest campaign finance report for the casino is $5 million. Opposition spending over $1 million as well. Just everybody, everywhere you look, there's signs, there's mailers telling us it's going to be our salvation or our damnation. And we will see what the voters have to say about it. So far, there's pretty good response on early voting. 2 days to go. There's more than came out for the November election. And that's probably going to be critical as to what happens. The thinking is that if there was high turnout, there's maybe been enough change in how Tammany people view gambling that a high turnout would favor a passage of it. But if it's low turnout, the thought is that people who are really against it, who have been pretty loud and pretty passionate about it, might see the day.
Okay, let's sort of background people a little bit too, in case they're not quite sure what this casino proposal is and where it'll go.
It's a $325 million casino resort with a hotel. It's going to be right past the I-10 twin spans near Slidell near the lakefront. It's going to be called Camellia Bay if it's adopted, and it's hoping to draw people that are now maybe going to Mississippi to gamble. Some locals, but also people from other parts of the area.
And so there'll be a hotel involved too,
a hotel,
and a restaurant, etc.
Like maybe seven restaurants, including Drew Brees is supposed to have one.
And John
Foles. That's right.
And Sarah, wasn't this the casino from upstate Louisiana?
Yes, there was a casino boat, Diamond Jacks, that I think was Isle of Capri originally, that was bought out of bankruptcy by this group, which is Peninsula Pacific Entertainment. And they claim their plan was always to try to seek to move the license. The Shreveport, Bossier City area is very saturated. And there was a spectrum analysis that was commissioned by the State Economic Development Foundation that said it'd be a good idea to move one to the North Shore and maybe one to central Louisiana.
Now the proponents have been claiming that the Mississippi gambling interests have been doing misleading commercials.
Well, yeah, the question is who is actually funding the opposition, because they are 501c4s. They say they don't have to disclose their donors. I did ask the guy that owns the Silver Slipper if it was true, and he said, oh, we just gave a little bit of money because we know it's going to fail, so we didn't really need to spend that much. So how much they're actually putting in is anybody's guess, but certainly that's what P2E would like you to think.
What are the basic arguments for and against?
The basic arguments against it is that it'll bring crime, that it won't perhaps be as financially successful, and the area could be left with a kind of a failed casino, an eyesore, that it's bad for the fabric of the society, that it causes families to go hungry and marriages to break up, and it'll bring in sex trafficking and things like that. There's also a claim that that's actually not true, that if it is passed, a casino could go anywhere in the parish. That's not actually true, but that's that's being said a lot to try to get Western St. Tammany people to vote against it. The pro side is this is a big old economic shot in the arm. You got lots of jobs. You've got spin-off. You know, it'll bring in commerce, and you know, it'll develop that lakefront, which really hasn't been developed that much out there.
So as you say, early voting is showing even a greater turnout than all of the November, the earlier voting November election. So there is definitely interest here.
There
I mean,
is
we're
interest.
seeing a lot of spots, and you guys in St. Tammany getting a lot of flyers, right?
That's right. You can't watch a Saints game without finding out something about our casino proposal.
And it's the only thing on the ballot, isn't it?
It is the absolute only
Just
thing
that
on the
one
ballot.
question, yes or no?
Yep.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes next Saturday. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Jeff, let's go on over to you. And LSU now has a new coach, outgoing coach. There is a big payday for the one coming in and also some money for the one going out. How do they pay for this?
Well, you know, college football, Marcia, is big business. You know, the LSU athletic program is well over $157 million in revenue. The football program alone is around $100 million. So to pay a head coach like Ed Ogeron $17 million to go away, and then to pay Brian Kelly $9.5 million a year in salary is pretty much like the going rate right now for a major college football coach. I know it sounds astronomical. It's a far cry. I remember in 1999, I was the first year at the Times-Picayune, I was the beat writer at LSU, and Nick Saban got hired. He was making $1.2 million a year, and that seemed astronomical back then. Now that's what the assistant coaches make. But this is what you have to pay to get someone of Brian Kelly's stature and profile to leave a school like Notre Dame.
So tell us about him.
Well, I mean, he's got an incredible track record. I would say he's probably the most credentialed head coach LSU's ever hired. He's won everywhere he's been. He won at Grand Valley State, a Division II program in Michigan, then went to Central Michigan, took that program to a conference championship, moved on up very quickly to Cincinnati, ended up building their program, took them to the Sugar Bowl here in New Orleans, and then also took them to the Orange Bowl, which was unprecedented for the University of Cincinnati. Then got promoted, obviously, to Notre Dame and has been the winningest coach they've ever had there. So to get someone like him who was very successful and really quite satisfied being in South Bend was a real coup for Scott Woodward, who has done an incredible job as the athletic director in his first couple of years there. He's already hired Kim Mulkey to lead the women's basketball program. She was happy and successful at Baylor. And then in June, he hired Jay Johnson to be the baseball coach. He was happy and successful at Arizona. So Scott Woodward is bringing in top-notch coaches from very high-profile programs to lead to join the LSU athletic program.
But Jeff, isn't it true that, all right, so football is paid for by the so-called Tiger Athletic Foundation, which is alumni give money to, and that's where they get the money. But doesn't football pay for the rest of sports at the university? Doesn't it support baseball and basketball and everything else?
No, yeah, pretty much. You're spot on. I mean, just the ticket sales alone, I think, is around $50–60 million that LSU brings in. That's why they like to play as many home games as they can. It supports the non-revenue sports in the athletic program. This is the kind of how it works, the business model around the country with really high-profile Division I athletics like LSU. So to pay a head coach $9 million seems crazy right now, but when you look at a program that has $100 million in revenue, it really kind of makes a lot more sense. And really what you're getting right now in a guy like Brian Kelly, you're getting a CEO, someone that can run a program. And I really think that was kind of ultimately the downfall of Ed Ogeron. He's a great X's and O's football coach, not really a CEO of a program like LSU, and it kind of came unraveled on him the last couple of years.
So a 10-year contract for Coach Kelly?
Yes, and again, Brian Kelly, everyone I've talked to across the country thinks this was a home run hire. I know he's not from the South, but again, I go back to 1999. I remember hearing the same concerns and criticisms when Nick Saban was hired out of Michigan State. He came from West Virginia, and I think that turned out just fine.
You know, it used to be being the head coach of Notre Dame was like the most prestigious job almost in all of sports. And now for LSU to be able to draw somebody from that job, it's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, the big issue with Notre Dame right now at that high level is their academic requirements are so high, it really limits and restricts the student athlete population that they can recruit from. He will not have those limitations at LSU. LSU is really the only major, the only SEC school that only has one major powerful program in the state. Everyone else, Alabama has Auburn to battle, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Florida has Florida State, Miami. It's a huge advantage for LSU. Every kid in this state, almost all of them want to go to LSU, so it kind of recruits itself. I think Brian Kelly's looking forward to having that, that freedom to bring in players like that, because he really couldn't do that at Notre Dame.
Well, we wish him good luck with it all. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Well, over to you. Municipal Auditorium in New Orleans, still not used now since Hurricane Katrina, but there's money there to do something with it, but we might lose it if we don't do it soon.
Well, that's right. And right now it's kind of a fluctuating amount of money depending on the timing and the ideas that the city might put forth. Right now it's about $39.1 million. So it's not money that the city has, so they wouldn't lose it in that sense. They would lose out on the opportunity to receive that funding. But let me remind folks that the Municipal Auditorium hasn't been what it once was for quite a long time. And just for starters, that area is zoned for a casino. And that's because in 1995, that's where Harris was located before they moved to the Canal Street location. So there have been a lot of damage there from Hurricane Katrina and Gustav, and a great deal of community backlash from Treme and the French Quarter. It's not as though it's a full city uprising, but the people closest to it in proximity haven't wanted. We didn't really see that when it was a casino, or even when it was a minor league ice hockey rink.
So opposition to potentially becoming City Hall, which is what Mayor Cantrell floated.
That's correct. And the idea of the City Hall was a conceptual one. The city put out a RFQ to get some ideas about what might this look like, and they looked at it as a economic development situation for the area. The neighborhood folks think that's not the right approach, and they don't think that would be truly an economic development factor. The FEMA money is not tied to the City Hall concept. It's tied to that building. And that's part of why the amount of money would go up and down depending on what the money would be used for. But if there was a significant renovation and upgrade of the Municipal Auditorium, we're probably talking about $150 million. So 39 would be a good start, but there would still have to be funding.
Yeah, 39, you don't want to lose 39 mil, that's for sure. Is there a deadline for when this money would have to be spent and the building in operation?
Summer 2023, and the way it's written right now, the building would have to be up and available for use in summer 2023.
Well,
now, the city can seek an extension, but you have to seek an extension based on here's the plan. Give us more time.
And there's no
right
plan.
Now, there isn't anything to point to.
Nope. Okay.
So,
E, did you want to say something real
Well,
quick?
I was going to say, we don't need another theater. We don't need another auditorium now. And so, like the Lowe's Theater, isn't open. So to do something with that building, it has to be something other than an auditorium. So if not an auditorium, what is it going to be? And I think just about any kind of proposal is going to grow opposition. And then there's part B to that argument with the land sort of being considered sort of like hallowed ground at the old Congo Square area too. So I think that's part of the argument too.
But it won't be City Hall.
yeah, that's right.
It won't be City Hall. I mean, that's kind of firm. No more City Hall plans.
Well, City Council pretty much put a nail in that with saying it has to go through a specific neighborhood process that City Council would have to approve it, which means you would have to have enough votes. That makes it a very high bar. So while it does not say absolutely positively not, all the hoops that we'd have to go through is essentially dead.
All righty, Will. Thanks a lot. E, let's go back over to you. We have some elections coming up also here in Orleans.
Yeah, and I want you to know that it's very unusual that we have elections coming up in mid-December. This also affects the casino election in St. Tammany, and it all goes back to the hurricane. That the elections would have been held already by then, but because of all the disruption, that the state agreed to push back the elections. The same thing happened several years back, and that was the famous election when Mr. Wynn or Mr. Gow got elected to Congress over Bill Jefferson. But there are several runoffs on the ballot. I want to mention two, which I think are the more interesting. One is for sheriff. This is a job we used to call criminal sheriff because we used to have two sheriffs, a criminal sheriff and a civil sheriff. Since then, the jobs have been combined into one. So now it's just a sheriff, but it's not a sheriff like in Jefferson Parish or anywhere else. This is not a cop. This is not someone out to catch people. This is more of a jailer and also a keeper of records. So you have an interesting runoff here. The incumbent is Marlon Guzman, who's been there for 16 years. And he's got into a runoff against Susan Hutton, who's not really who's not really well known outside of the I guess the circles of people of Falcon. But it was a fairly close election that Guzman had 48% and Hudson had 35%. And so now the point that Guzman made really quickly right after the election is he put out a brochure saying that, there's all this talk about so-called progressive and the far left liberal and all of that, and I guess it's all tied in with the to defund the police, even though that's not necessarily her position. But there is that movement out there, and Guzman is kind of accusing her of being part of that movement, and it's one that has some kind of popularity. To Guzman's favor, he's a longtime politician. He's been involved. He's a former CAO, a former council member. He was very active in uptown politics.
Okay, let's take a look at the other election because we're running out of time.
The other election is in District E. District E is always an interesting election because that's a big chunk of land out in eastern New Orleans. I mean, it's huge. It's not, the population is fairly well dispersed though, but it's a runoff between Cindy Wynn, who's the incumbent, and Oliver Thomas. Oliver Thomas is a former member of the council from a different district. He was once on there from District B, and he was also a council member at large. And there was a time when Oliver Thomas, if you'd have asked people who the next mayor is going to be, and they would have said Oliver Thomas. He got into political trouble, was accused by federal authorities of taking a bribe on the parking contract, wound up going to prison, and so that derailed his political career for a while, but he's trying for a comeback, and he's in the position right now where he got 45% against Cindy Wynn. And Cindy Wynn's 41. Cindy Wynn is an activist in the area and part of the, I guess, the emerging Vietnamese political population.
Okay. All right. An election next Saturday. All right. Thanks a lot, Ian. Sarah, let's go back on over to you. And former St. Tammany Sheriff Jack Strain is now spending his nights in the Plaquemines Parish Jail.
That's right. He was convicted earlier actually last month, on 8 counts of sex crimes with boys. 4 of those carry a mandatory life sentence. And he was still facing a federal corruption charge. He had 16 counts against him. That was actually the first thing that got him into trouble. It was investigators that were looking into that found that he had sex crime victims. So he was facing 16 counts, and he pleaded guilty this past Wednesday on 1 count for a mandatory statutory limit of 10 years.
But in federal court.
In
so
federal
can you kind of
court.
explain what were those charges involving?
Well, those involved a work release program, which is where they put people nearing the end of their term and they work outside the community. They stay in a dorm-like setting. He privatized that during his last term in office. He handed it to some adult children of cronies of his. It looked like a straight kind of cronyism deal. It turned out to be a kickback deal, almost $1.4 million. They funneled the money to their dads. Their dads gave money back to Jack, and it turns out one of those fathers was one of his sex crime victims. So it was kind of a way to enrich himself, but it was also kind of a way to buy the the silence and the loyalty of some of his victims.
And so investigation into that led to the sex crimes case.
That's right.
At the state level.
And the FBI agent and the IRS agent who confronted him, confronted his co-conspirators, were not expecting that guy to say, Jack Strain molested me when I was 10 years old.
Okay, so he sits now in Plaquemines Parish Jail. He just pled guilty to 1 count in federal court. Where will he ultimately wind up? I mean, he's not been sentenced yet for either one.
He'll be sentenced in January on the state charges, and he will be sentenced March 9th for the federal charges. It's a real quandary as to where he'll go. There's divergent of opinion on whether it'll be who sentences him first, who took custody first, or whether, in fact, he might be able to get off on this one being a final conviction because he can't appeal a guilty plea. He is probably going to appeal those state charges. But it looks like signs are pointing to it being a state facility, a state penal facility for him.
As you said, the federal charges, there were many, but he pled guilty to only 1.
That's right. And I had a few people say they were surprised that the U.S. Attorney's Office didn't push for more, just 1 instead of 16, especially since, you know, he didn't play ball with them. He didn't go for a plea until like the 11th hour and 59 minutes.
All a very, very disturbing situation for folks in St. Tammany, for anybody, you know, who read the coverage. You covered the trial, the state trial. It was really disturbing.
Yeah, I think it's shocking to everybody. I mean, I think that's basically, you know, even though he'd been charged and there was a long time for it to come to trial because of COVID. So the idea that he was accused of molesting children was out there, but just kind of the harrowing testimony of 5 different men, 4 of them who was charged with, talking about, you know, what he'd done, seeing them just emotional, kind of ruined lives. Yeah. It had a lot of impact.
I'm sure it did. All right, Sarah, thanks a lot. Jeff, over to you. Another emotional time for everybody in this region is watching the Saints game last night. It's kind of heartbreaking.
Pretty bleak right now, right? They haven't won a game since October. The losing streak's now 5 games. That's the longest losing streak of Sean Payton's coaching tenure. The longest losing streak for the organization all the way back to 2005, if you remember that Katrina season, was really an outlier of a season. So I don't see a whole lot of hope on the horizon. I mean, the Saints played against the Cowboys without 9 starters, 9 injured starters. I've covered the team 22 years, Marcia. They've never had this kind of injury list, and it's not just players; it's key players. You know, it's the ones that matter. Guys like Alvin Kamara, your starting tackles, Ryan Ramczyk and out Teron Armstead. So I wish I had better news to report, but it doesn't look good. I mean, they're now 5-7. They've gone from being almost in first place to now tied for last place in the division. This is after winning the division the last 4 years for the first time in franchise history. They've got 5 games left. I think if they were to somehow miraculously pull it together and sweep all 5 games, they could get in the playoffs again. But I just don't see that happening.
Taysom Hill injured himself, right? His finger now. There's a problem with the finger, so he won't be able to play?
Well, we don't know that for sure yet. That's the preliminary diagnosis that he has what they call a mallet finger. It's basically a torn tendon in his middle finger of his passing hand. He played in the game the other night with that injury. He's a tough guy, and he played a very up and down game in his starting debut this season. Made a lot of great plays, made a lot of very bad plays, and that's really been kind of the issue for the Saints all season long. They just haven't been able to consistently put it together in any aspect of the game. And while he did bring some juice and some energy to the offense, he had 4 interceptions, and you're not going to beat anybody with that kind of performance.
If he can't play, who's next in line?
Yeah, that's the question. I think Trevor Siemian, who started the previous 4 games, will get the call. I can't see Sean Payton turning to Ian Book, the rookie from Notre Dame. He hasn't really been active very much this year. I think they really wanted to kind of redshirt him this season, let him learn the playbook. The Saints have an incredibly complicated offensive playbook, and I just don't think Sean Payton feels like throwing him to the wolves in a season that's already kind of spiraling downhill.
So the last time the Saints had a rookie in and won a game, you have an interesting point on that.
Yeah, they've only started 2 rookie quarterbacks ever. Danny Werfel in 1997, he lost both games. And then the last rookie quarterback to win a game, Archie Manning, 1971. So we're going back a long way.
Right.
And Sean Payton's never started a rookie quarterback, even in his years as an assistant coach. So I think it'd be a long shot to see him Book out there. The only way I see him playing or starting is if something happens to Trevor Siemian.
So 5 more games to go in the
Yes.
regular season. So we can hold out hope. I mean, maybe hope
Sure.
springs eternal, right?
Sure, there's also the Easter bunnies
Yeah.
still been visiting as well. So I don't want to be that down, but it just feels like a year that's been lost
Yeah.
for the Saints. They've just never, since all the way back to Hurricane Ida and Michael Thomas's injury before the season, seems like they've never been able to kind of get it together.
But the good
Okay.
news is at least we won't get our hearts broken in January. I would say.
Well,
So-
I guess.
That's true.
Okay, time for other stories. E, we're going to start with you.
Well, a sure sign of the carnival season. Wednesday night, the Rex organization, which is celebrating its 150th anniversary, had a dinner for its members on Royal Street across from the Montleon. And at one point, the captain told everybody to go on the street for a surprise. And here was a surprise. And the crowd was thrilled. St. Aug has been marching in the Rex Parade for a long, long time. It's been a really good relationship. And the Rex captain and officials exchanged proclamations with the St. Aug officials. But it was a very moving moment.
Absolutely, and that's just always a wonderful sight to see, and just so enjoyable.
And you can imagine the sound of St. Aug echoing off of those old buildings
Oh, yeah.
in the quarter.
It's terrific. It's always so exciting. Thanks a lot, E. All right, let's go over to you, Will.
Dillard University got a $5 million donation from Kirkland and Jones law firm. Might seem like a bit of an odd thing since it was based on a settlement involving 4 historically black universities in the state of Maryland. 15-year battle and went to settlement. They got $577 million. The law firm was doing this pro bono work, but they got statutory payment of millions and decided to give it all away. And Dillard University benefited because
Wonderful.
the lead attorney chairs their board of trustees.
Okay, wonderful. Good news for them. Sarah, real quick.
Real quick, there was an election last month. Voters shot down in St. Tammany, shot down a sales tax for the jail and justice center for the 4th time in a row. And now those chickens are coming home to roost as the budget was adopted last night, and they have slashed the amount of money they're spending on state-mandated court costs for the sheriff's jail and the DA's office and the 22nd Judicial District Court.
Okay, challenge for them to figure out now. Jeff, real quick to you.
It's been a forgettable football season for most the teams in our state, but one team's carrying the banner, the Southeastern Louisiana Lions. They're in the quarterfinals of the FCS playoffs Saturday, 1 o'clock at James Madison. They win, they get a home game back in Hammond, so Southeastern Louisiana Lions kind of carrying the torch for us.
Okay, congrats to them. All right, guys, thank you for being here. Thank you all for watching. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.